Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Cheap Shots. This is our series where we show you how to save money on the hobby aspect of miniature wargaming, and as you can see in this picture here, we're working on a unit of nightly orders for Warhammer Fantasy Battles Empire Army. So you can see here we have 9 miniatures here that'll be used for the nightly order. These guys will be inner circle knights, and so as you can see here, this is what the unit's going to look like by the time it's all said and done. Now, assuming that you need to buy all the paints that we recommend in our Cheapskate method, we're talking about a grand total investment of $37.67 to paint up this whole unit in very bright colors in a beautiful tabletop standard, and also costing a minimal amount of money. At the same time, if we were to, of course, do the other side where we use the name brand paints from Army Painter as well as Games Workshop, we'll be talking about a grand total savings of $217.38. So we're going to show you guys how to paint up these nightly orders very cheaply with some really simple materials and show you the techniques we use in order to paint that, at the same time saving you over $217. So that being said, let's get this video on a roll. So the very first thing you need to do with your miniatures is, of course, prime them. In this case, I use Rust-Oleum's flat white primer. It costs $3.99 at my local Walmart, and all I do is just a real simple base coat real fast, just spraying over the entirety of the miniatures with that primer. The primer does two things in this case. First of all, it undercoats your miniatures in a bright white color, and what that'll do is it'll interact very nicely with the color schemes that you're putting on these miniatures to make them very vibrant and bright. And secondly, it's giving a good textured surface for the paint to adhere to as you are painting your miniature. If you were to paint acrylics directly onto bare plastic without any priming whatsoever, the paint would just run off on your miniature. It'd be easy to rub off of it and it would ruin your finish. So by priming it, you're allowing your miniature to actually have a good texture for your paint to stick to. And so as you can see here in this photo, I just did a real quick coating, real light dusting with my primers on the miniatures as well. You don't need to have 100% coverage to do a decent priming job on your miniatures. It just needs to be enough on there to where the paint will have something to adhere to. So once you're done with the priming, the next step you need to do is a base coat. So in this step, I decided to paint up the horses in 4 different colors, and the reason why is because I wanted a wide variety of different colored mounts for these knights to ride on. So as you can see in this photo, I used 4 different paints. The very first one on the left-hand side is Melted Chocolate by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a very rich dark brown color. It runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just do 2 simple base coats of that onto the miniature. The 2 horses in the middle, I use Anita's Acrylic Rich Brown. It's a little bit of a lighter color, and I decided to go with that one to add some color variety. And then for the 2 next to the right of them, I use Sable Brown by Americana acrylic paints. That you can get that at your local Hobby Lobby as well. The 2 thin coats for that. And then lastly, for the last 2 horses on the right hand side there, I use Latte by Anita's acrylic as well. Now the 2 tubes of Anita's acrylic as well as the Americana paint I got at my local Hobby Lobby. That runs about 65 cents for those tubes of paint. So all I need to do, of course, is just 2 thin layers of paint on all the fur of the horses, and they're ready to move on. You don't really need to be too neat at this stage because you're just doing base coats for right now. And once you're done with the base coats, the next thing you do, of course, is a dry brush. And unfortunately, I did not get a photo of what the dry brush looks like on the miniatures, so I do apologize for that ahead of time. I just kind of got overly excited as I was painting my miniatures up, forgot to take a picture of this step. All you need to do, of course, is use 2 paints. You need to use Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint. It runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. You'll do a light dry brushing with the Territorial Beige on the horses that you painted in the Sable Brown, the Rich Brown, as well as the Melted Chocolate Brown that you use for your darker steeds. You will then use Antique White in order to dry brush the horses you painted in Latte to give it a nice contrast. Dry brushing is kind of nice because what it does is that it picks up the details on the highlight aspects of the horses. So things like the raised surfaces of the musculature on the mounts, for example. At the same time, the darker color beneath it, of course, will stay into the recesses, adding to the 3-dimensionality of your miniature, also adding that little bit of extra detail. Now, I will warn you, whenever you dry brush a miniature, you will end up with a chalky, kind of pastel finish on your miniature. If that look bothers you, do not worry, and the reason why is because all of that will be resolved when we get to the oil washing stage of the miniature. The oil washing stage will help to flatten down those colors and smooth out those textures, and also help to blend the layers of color together to give us a really nice finish. So once the dry brush is over with, the next thing we need to work on now is the armor for the horses. So now that we're done with the fur for the mounts, the next thing we need to work on now is the armor. And as you can see here, I have a huge variety of colors that I used for the different armor plates for the different mounts. And the reason why is because when you look at illustrations of medieval knights, knights were very individualistic. They had their own colors for their different houses, their own coat of arms, their own colors of lineages representing what nations they fought for. So because of that, the variety of colors within knights was greatly, varying. It just had a whole bunch of different colors representing the different knights that fought for them. So I wanted to create that tradition and carry it onward with my Empire army, and so because of that, that's the reason why we have such a variety of colors on this one. So as you can see, for the metallic one, I used 3 of these mounts. I painted their armor metallics. The one on the left was painted with pure gold by folk art, the one in the center was copper, and the one on the far right hand side was gunmetal gray. All 3 of those tube of paints were only 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. Now the rest of the armor, of course, I painted was in blue, yellow, green, orange, magenta, as well as in red. So for the blue armor, I used bright blue by Apple Barrel Paint. I used King Gold for the yellow for the yellow armor by Apple Barrel Paint. I used Holly Branch by Apple Barrel Paint for the green horse. I use Anita's Acrylic True Red for the horse that's in red armor. I use Bright Magenta by Apple Barrel Paint for the one that's painted with magenta color, and finally for the one that's painted orange, I use Ripe Tomato by Apple Barrel Paint. Now all the Apple Barrel paints will run you 50 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, while the Anita's Acrylic Red will run you 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby for that one. And of course, I just did 2 thin coats on all the armor panels for each of the horses, just to get a good basic solid coat off from that. And as you can see there, you don't need to be particularly neat on this one. Just make sure that you don't accidentally paint over the flesh of the horses that you just completed. If you do, just touch up with whatever dark color that you use beneath it for the base coat, and that'll be perfectly fine. So now that we're done painting the armor panels, the next step is to do a dry brush. So the dry brush that we need to work on for these 6 horses are basically the brightly colored ones. For the metallic horses, we really don't need to work on the dry brushing too much for them, except for the copper colored one, but I will talk about that one here in an instance. So as you can see, I have all 6 of my horses, and of course I dry brushed them with different colors. For the orange colored one, I used Tropic Orange. For the one that's magenta colored, I used Cameo Pink. For the one that's green, I used Lime Sherbet. For the one in red, I used Flag Red. For the yellow one, I used a Sunny Day, and for the blue one, I used Sky Blue. All of the paints that I used were made by Apple Barrel Paint, and they run you 50 cents at your local Walmart. Traditionally, whenever you need to pick a color to dry brush your miniature, the best thing to do is to look for a pastel version of the base coat color that you're going to use. So for example, if you look on the one on the right hand side, the blue horse, I used bright blue for the armor panels, and then I looked for a pastel variant of that color, which was Sky Blue, to dry brush it over. The pastel color helps, like I said before, to catch the raised surfaces on the armor, and while leaving the darker color in the recesses, adds a nice highlight as well as 3-dimensionality to your miniature as well. And so whenever it comes to dry brushing, remember, always start off lightly with a light dry brush, and you can slowly add more dry brushing to brighten up your miniature as you need to, because it's very easy to add more dry brushing, but it's very difficult to add less. So always start off with a light dry brush and then slowly build upward. And if you're wondering what's on the iPad in the background, I'm actually watching Lord Tremendous Battle Reports as I'm painting on my miniatures, because it's a good video to watch while you're working on Warhammer stuff. It's very entertaining, and I highly suggest you check it out. So now that we're done with the base coating and the dry brushing of all the horses, the next thing we need to work, of course, is on the details of the horses. So in this case, we're looking at the tails. We're also looking at the reins of the horses as well as the saddles. In this case, I base coat all of those parts in Pavement by Apple Barrel Paint, and runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. It's a nice dark gray, not quite black, but a very dark gray. It does a really nice job with the finishing and looks really awesome when you dry brush with lighter tones of gray. So that's what you need to do for all the horses, for their saddles, tails, as well as their reins. Now the next few slides will be dedicated to the mount of the character that will be leading this unit, and this is the horse that's here. You can see here in the center here, that's the one with the copper armor. I added some more details to it. First of all, we're going to talk about the armor panels real quick. I decided to dry brush the copper armor panels with a light layer of pure gold by Folk Art, so that way you can see some of the raised surfaces and catch some of the details on the embossing there on the armor panels. And for the last bit of dry brushing on the miniature as well, I decided to do a quick dry brush with some Anniversary Silver by Folk Art. That runs you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, and I did that as a kind of like a last little highlight to catch the raised surface of the miniature. And the reason why is because when you look at bronze or brass colored armor, there is some silver highlights to it to help catch some of the details. And this thought would be one additional layer of detailing on this arm miniature as well. The next step, of course, for this character mount was to work on the fabric of the miniature. In this case, I used two colors, one for base coating, one for dry brushing. For the fabric, I thought purple would be a nice contrasting color for the copper tone of the armor. So because I used Wild Iris by Apple Barrel paint as a base coat, I put two thin layers of that for the cloth that's hanging on the side of the horse, which is called the tabard. I also put two thin layers along the fabric, the ribbon that's around the reins of the horse as well. And then after I got done putting my 2 layers of Wild Iris, the next step, of course, was to dry brush it with Lilac Mist, also by Apple Barrel paint. Runs you 50 cents for that tube. I just did a quick light dry brushing with that onto both the fabric as well as the reins. The Lilac Mist also catches the raised surfaces of the miniature while leaving the Wild Iris in the recesses of the miniature as well, and it gives a nice three-dimensional look to it, at the same time adding some depth to your miniature. And one of the last bit of detail that I worked on the horse as well for the character mount was the laurel that's on top of the head of the horse. I picked that on 2 thin layers of palm leaf by Apple Barrel Green. It's a nice, beautiful color to use for plants and plant details on miniatures. So just put 2 thin coats of that. And lastly, there's a little bit of a ribbon sticking at the back of the horse's armor. I picked that out in King's Gold as well. And the reason why is because the yellow is a primary color that's used throughout my Empire army to kind of unify them and make them look all the same. Alright, so the next thing you need to do, of course, is do a dry brush on the saddles, the tails, as well as the reins of the horses. In this case, I use Anita's Gray by Anita's Acrylic. It's a nice, simple gray color. Just did a quick dry brushing real quick on the mane, the saddle, as well as the reins. It does a couple of things. First of all, it actually catches some of the details of the raised surfaces of the miniature while leaving that darker pavement color and the recesses. And actually also kind of helps to break up the monotony of the black as well. It brings out some of those details. And one of the final details that we work on for the miniatures as well is the saddles. Once again, this time I decided to board the saddles in white paint, just for the saddles as well as for the belt that goes around the midsection of the horses as well. I just picked it out in some really thin layers of white by Apple Barrel paint. Runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. And for this one, you will need to use several layers of this. I would recommend using 3 layers of white. The first 2 establish a very nice base coat in order to cover up any colors that might have spilt over on the details of these miniatures. And the third coat is where it really brings out that vibrancy within the saddle as well. Next, we work on the detailed portions of the miniature. For that, I used khaki paint. I just did a quick base coating with 2 different layers of that, just on things like the hooves. Each of these horses, of course, have hooves that you can see there on the bottom. I just picked those out in 2 thin layers of khaki paint made by Apple Barrel Paint. It runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. And I also did 2 thin layers upon the skeleton icon that's on the top of the head crest there of the champion miniature of the character that's done in the copper color. Now you'll notice the laurel as well as the ribbon is not painted on this miniature. That's because when I did this step, I didn't paint those parts yet. It is kind of taken out of sequence, but I just wanted to focus on some of the detail work that I did on the champion's horses at the same time, show you what I did for the rest of them at the same time. And finally, the last bit of detail work that I did on the horses was use the metallics on this one. So for example, I used 3 different colors. I used Anniversary Silver, Pure Gold, as well as Gunmetal. For the chainmail that's showing on most of the horses around the neck, I decided to use Anniversary Silver. It's a nice bright silver color that kind of brings out those details. Now for the ridges along the spine of the horses, as well as in some of the darker panels, I use Gunmetal Gray for that one, so that way you can bring out those bit of detail on those miniatures as well. And then finally, I also use Pure Gold for the saddles on some of the horses. Some of the horses have this saddle that kind of raises above the back of the miniature, and for those that did that, I just painted those up in Pure Gold, and I did Gunmetal Gray for the 2 horses in the back left-hand corner as well. And then once you're done with this final step of the metallics, you're all done with the horses. Time for us to move on to the riders. Now for some of the riders, they do have flesh showing, primarily on their faces. Other than that, though, there's not much flesh showing on these miniatures. For that, I just put 2 thin layers of Apple Barrel flesh. It costs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. These are for the miniatures that are faces, as well as for the little cherub that's carrying the ribbon on the champion for this miniature as well. So just put 2 thin layers of flesh paint on that, and then you're ready to move on to the dry brushing. And once again, the dry brushing that I used on the miniatures was by Delta Serum Coat Peaches and Cream. It's a nice pale flesh color. Just did a quick dry brushing on all the exposed flesh on these miniatures to add some 3-dimensionality. The Peaches and Cream color catches onto the raised surfaces of the miniature, while that darker flesh color is left in the recesses and does a very nice finish for the miniature. Now the next color we need to use for all the miniatures, of course, is to do a base coat for the armor. And armor covers a majority of these miniatures, so this step is really nice because you just kind of focus on those portions of it. So what I decided to use was 2 different colors. I used Pure Gold by Folk Art because I wanted to paint some of the miniatures in a golden color armor, so you can see 2 of them have that nice golden color, while the rest of them I paint up in Gunmetal Gray by Folk Art. Runs you about 75 cents to your local Hobby Lobby for those 2 colors. And all I did, of course, is add 2 thin coats of metallic paint for those I want to be painted gold and those I want to be painted in silver. Now, for the next few slides, of course, I will be focusing on the character miniatures for this unit. So that being said, let's go and start with the champion. So for the champion that's leading this unit, he's basically the one riding the copper-colored horse that we painted earlier. So because of that, I wanted to continue on that color scheme of gold as well as copper as well as purple onto the rider as well. So for the rider, for the trousers, I basically picked those out in Wisteria by Delta Serum Coat. It's a nice light purple color that I picked out the trousers in. And of course for the top, I used Wild Iris by Apple Barrel Paint in order to paint the sleeves as well as a shirt for the rider as well. And like I said before, this rider will be painted up in pure gold by Folk Art. The next step, of course, is a dry brush. I use Lilac Mist by Apple Barrel Paint to dry brush the trousers as well as the shirt to catch the raised details and to add some contrast to the miniature as well. And then I also did some base coating for the details. So things like the leather goods that the character is riding. So for example, their gloves. I used Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint, runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart, to pick up those leather goods. And then finally, for the vents that are cut into the sleeves of his shirt, I picked that out with Tahitian Blue to add a nice contrasting color to the purple and also add some color variety to these miniatures. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but these Empire characters are based off German mercenaries from the Renaissance era in European history. And what they did, they actually had these shirts where they actually had slits, vents cut into the sleeves of the shirt, and they had a different bright color undershirt beneath it in order to add some contrast. They're very brightly colorful during the Renaissance. They're called Landnex units. So that's exactly what I decided to do. I used Tahitian Blue in order to create that effect. For the other character that's in this unit as well, this is like an Empire General type character. I decided to go with a bright color scheme for him as well. I decided to go for like this quad color scheme for his clothing, where basically you have alternating colors on the torso as on the legs. So for example, for this rider on his right arm and left leg, I decided to pick those out in bright blue by Apple Barrel Paint. And as for his left arm and right leg, I used King's Gold by Apple Barrel Paint for the yellow. So you see, I just kind of like did this, two-tone color scheme for his armor, for his clothing for the most part. And then of course I picked out his mustache and his hair in Ripe Tomato by Apple Barrel Paint as well, the 2 thin layers of that. Afterwards, started working on the detailed portions of this miniature. For his leather goods, I used Territorial Beige to pick out the boots that this character was wearing, and then I also used Apple Barrel's Light Mocha in order to pick out the straps of the stirrups that he's wearing as well. I also did some dry brushing. For the parts of his clothing that's done in blue, I use Sky Blue, and for parts that are done in yellow, I use Sunny Day to do those. I just did a real quick dry brushing with those. Finally, the back of this character is wearing a very large cape that's covering pretty much his left arm as well as his back. For that one, I decided to use Anita's Acrylic True Red. It's a nice, vibrant red color that contrasts very nicely with the yellow and the blue that's on this miniature as well and kind of ties it all together. So you can see that I just did a really 2 thin coats of that on his cloak. It looks very, very vibrant as well as very brightly colored. And I also use exactly the same color for the ribbon that the champion is also carrying as well. As you can see, there's a ribbon around the laurel around the base of his lance. I picked that out in Anita's Acrylic Red. I did exactly the same thing with the ribbon that the little cherub is also carrying as well. Just a nice vibrant color that contrasts nicely with the gold armor, and at the same time also matches the other character as well. And then from there, of course, I also base coated their lances. I decided to use Pavement by Apple Barrel Paint in order to do that. Just put 2 thin coats of that along the length of their lances. That way it's a nice dark color that kind of unifies the unit as well. And if you notice, of course, there's parts of this that I've taken the photos and kind of done it out of sequence. And the reason why I did that is so that way you can see exactly how I kind of batch painted them together, so that way you can see how that effect came out. And the last thing I did for these character miniatures, of course, was to do some more detail work. Now we get to focus on the smaller details. For the rider on the left-hand side, I basically picked out some gemstones that he had in his armor using Tahitian Blue by Delta Serum Coat. You can get that at your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents. He's got like a jewel pommel on his sword. He's also got some jewel work on the hilt of his sword as well. I picked out those details in Tahitian Blue. The rest of the colors were used for the detail work on the champion that's riding the champion right now. So I used Palm Leaf Green to pick out the details of the laurel leaf around the length of his lance that's kind of hanging there. And then for the cherub, I then picked out its wings in Ivory by Apple Barrel Paint, runs at 50 cents local Walmart. Did 2 thin coats of ivory for the wings, and then for the skull of the little crazy cherub thing, I picked out 2 layers of khaki paint as well. And then once I let those dry, then just of course super glued both of these riders to their mounts, so that way I can move on to the oil washing for these guys later on. And as you can see there, the rider on the left hand side, he rides the magenta horse while the champion rides the copper colored horse. Now if you're wondering why did I paint the horse in a magenta color with pale flesh, like this little My Little Pony brony look for it. It's just because I like the irony of one of the deadliest characters in this unit riding a pink horse. I just think it's just hilarious to me, and that's why I like doing that kind of stuff. Breaking conventions is what I do on this channel. So now that we're done with the characters, the next thing we need to work on now is on the riders. And as you can see in this miniature, this picture as well, I decided to do some detail work with these guys. Pretty much it's just breaking up the monotony of the colors. First of all, I used gunmetal gray to pick out the blades of their lances. I also used pure gold to pick out some gold elements, as you can see in the miniatures as well. I also used anniversary silver to pick out the chainmail in some of these miniatures. At the same time, I also used copper just to add some variety with things like the knee pads, the elbow pads, and some other details that are spread throughout the miniature. And as you can see what colors I used for each and every single one of them as well. And now, if you wonder what the big giant tube of black paint's for, it's just there so that way I can stand these miniatures up so you can see them. I didn't use black paint on any of these guys at all. And for the riders, the next thing I did, of course, is I worked on their lances. And on their lances, I picked it out with pavement paint by Apple Barrel Paint. Just did 2 thin layers along the shafts of the lances. Just to be very careful that I didn't overspill into the detailed portions of the work that I did on the armor, as well as on the hilts, as well as the butt caps of their lances as well. It's a nice dark color that also contrasts nicely with the bright color of their armor, and it looks really, really cool. Now it's time to work on the detail aspects of these miniatures, and these are things like their cloaks, their shields, and any other details that we want to pick out for the miniature as well. And this is where it gets where you get a little bit more creative with your color choices. Basically, the best rule of thumb is to use contrasting colors or complementary colors to use for the armor, based on the armor of the horses, is what I did. So for example, the rider on the left-hand side, I painted his shield green so that way it matches his horse's armor, but then I also used yellow for his cloak, as well as purple for his head crest because they're complementary colors to green. For the rider that's done in red, I picked out red for his shield as well as for his head crest, and that was the only details for that character. On the rider there in the middle, on the gold, riding the gold colored horse, I decided to use green for his cloak just to add a little bit of color variety. For the one that's riding the blue horse, I painted his shield in blue, at the same time painted his head crest in yellow and then his cloak in red because those are nice complementary and contrasting colors to what his horse is riding. Now for the guy in silver, of course, he's wearing gold armor to contrast with his horse. I used blue for his cloak because it's a nice contrasting color with his golden color armor. For the rider that's riding the yellow horse, I painted his shield in yellow, his head crest in orange, and at the same time, red tomato rather, and at the same time his cloak in purple because those are nice complementary and contrasting colors to yellow. And then finally the rider on the far right hand side with the orangish color, I used ripe tomato for the head crest as well as a shield to make it match. Now all these paints I used wild iris for the purple, bright blue for the blue portions, holly green for all the portions done in green, ripe tomato for all the orange colored ones, and king's gold for all the portions that are done in yellow. And all of those are made by Apple Barrel Paints, and we talked about those earlier. And all the details I did in red, I use Anita's acrylic True Red in order to pick out those details. And the last thing we need to work on for the very last detail is to dry brush the elements that we've just picked out on these miniatures. So as you can see there, for all the elements that are done in purple, I dry brushed in lilac mist. For all the elements in blue, I dry brushed in sky blue. For all the elements in green, I dry brushed with lime sherbet. For all the portions that are done in red, I dry brushed with cameo pink. For all the portions that are done in orange, I dry brushed in tropic orange. And for all the parts that are yellow, I dry brushed with sunny day. As you can see there, it creates a nice little contrasting look for all of them and a bright vibrancy of color for all of it. So now that we're done dry brushing and base coating these miniatures, the next step we need to do now is an oil wash. So because this painting method is a quick paint method, we are using Mid-Wax Polyshades Mission Oak in order to do our oil wash for this. Now traditionally whenever you do a quick paint method, a lot of people recommend that you use Army Painter Strong Tone, which is a good paint to use, a good product to use. It's an excellent product. The only problem though is it runs $32 a can, while a can of Mid-Wax Polyshades Mission Oak will actually only run you $7, $6.99 in most cases. I got mine at my local Walmart. So all you need to do, of course, is take the Mid-Wax Mission Oak color and just apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature. And as you can see here, this wash does a good job of blending the layers together, so that chalky finish that was done in the dry brushing, that has completely gone away. At the same time, it also blended the highlighting color with the base color, adding a nice vibrancy and depth to the miniature as well. At the same time, the oil wash also seeps into the recesses of the miniature, bringing out all those details forward, so that way you can see things like the recesses and the crevices, the the contours of their clothing, the armor panels. It just looks absolutely awesome. It also mutes the colors as well, so instead of being so extremely bright colored, it also kind of muted it down a little bit and also kind of darkened the miniature as well. Now I do suggest you let this dry and cure for 24 hours because it is a polyurethane in the stain, so because that will protect your miniatures when it's done, it's going to give a nice high gloss sheen when it's all finished and dried. And I would suggest you wait 24 hours as well because you really don't want to work on these miniatures if they're still sticky, and the reason why is because you could destroy the finish on your miniature, so be very, very careful of that. So my suggestion to you is to work on this portion, add the oil wash whenever you do your painting, leave it alone, and then wait till the next day to start working on these again. Now this next step is optional, however I like the matte finish on my miniatures, so I used spray varnish. I used Krylon's matte finish. Get that at my local Walmart for $3.99 and just do a quick once over with the matte varnish to matte down the sheen of the miniatures. Now if you like that high gloss candy coating on your miniatures, then by all means skip the stage. However, I like the matte finish. As you can see, by applying that matte finish, you can see all those details that the oil wash has brought out to the surface, and these miniatures look really awesome. So once you're done with the matte finish, the next thing you do is now work on the base. And for the bases on these miniatures, I'm going with the classic 4th edition Goblin Green look for the bases on these miniatures. As I talked about before, I use sand and wood glue for the texturing of my bases. All I do is I just put 2 thin layers of English Ivy Green. You can get that at your local Walmart for about 50 cents. Just put 2 thin layers of that stuff all over the bases of the miniature where the texturing is, because it gives a nice dark green color, makes it look like they're running over a field of grass. After that dries, and then of course do a quick dry brushing with some palm leaf by Apple Barrel Paint. Just do a quick once over with the palm leaf to cast the raised surfaces of the texturing. So you have like this bright texture, bright green with this dark green on the bottom. Makes a nice, really nice contrasting look. Also looks like it's running across grass. And then of course you need to rim the bases in exactly the same color with palm leaf green. Just did 2 thin layers of palm leaf green along the rims of the bases and let that dry. Now here's a side profile of all the horses. That way you can see the final detail you need to work on. All these horses have like these stones that the horses have their raised legs resting on, these little pile of rocks on their bases. So because of that, what I decided to do is pick all those out in 2 layers of Anita's acrylic gray. We talked about this product before, just did 2 thin layers of that and just picked out those stones. And for the very last detail on the stones, I decided to dry brush those stones with Granite Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. Runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just did a quick dry brushing on all the part on the stones that I painted gray to add some variety to it and also add some detail as well. And with that pretty much makes up the very last detail on these miniatures. And here we are with the end result. As you can see, we have a unit of 9 Knights of Inner Circle Knights for the nightly orders for the Empire, and they look absolutely amazing with very bright, vibrant colors, and they're ready to bring honor and glory to the Empire armies upon the battlefield. And so like we said before, this is the end result of the miniatures and look fantastic. So that being said, we're going to talk about exactly how we went about saving money for the painting process of these miniatures. What we're going to show you guys next is the shopping list that you will need to buy of Citadel as well as Army Painter products that they would recommend that you use in order to paint exactly the same way we did. We're going to show you exactly how much money you can save by doing the cheapskate method. So with that being said, let's get our shopping list on a roll. Alright, so this is the suggested method of materials that Citadel and Army Painter would recommend that you would use to paint up these miniatures using their products. First of all, you need to buy a can of Corax White Spray for a primer that runs you $17.80. And for the base coating all the fur on the horses, you'll need to use Wildwood, Seraphim Sepia, Snakebite Leather, as well as Misi Dust for the base coating on the horses. For the Wildwood, the Seraphim Sepia, and the Snakebite Leather, that runs you $7.80. And for the Zamisi Desert, that's going to run you $4.55. Next, you'll need to dry brush those miniatures using Rathbone, which also runs you $4.55 for that. Now for the parts for the armor, you will need to use Lead Belcher, Retributor armor, as well as Screaming Bell. For the armor, the panels are going to be metallic colors. Those run just $7.80 as well. For the armor that's going to be green, you need to use Caliban Green. For the yellow armor, Everland Sunset. For the blue armor, Teclis Blue. For the red armor, Mephiston Red. For the pink armor, Screamer Pink. And for the orange armor, you'll need to use Troll Slayer Orange. All those run you $4.55 for those colors. Afterwards, you need to dry brush these miniatures. For the armor panels in orange, you need to dry brush in Luganath Orange. For the blue armor panels, you need to dry brush in Blue Horror. For all the parts that are in green, you'll need to dry brush in Hellion Green. For all the parts that are in pink, you'll need to dry brush those with Emperor's Children. For all the parts that are in red, you'll need to use Wild Rider Red. And for all the parts in yellow, you will need to use Hexos Pale Sun, which runs you $4.55 for all of those. Now, for the lances and all the parts that will be black on your miniature, you'll need to use Eshin Gray. That runs you $4.55 for that. And also for the chainmail that you'll need to use Ironbreaker for that, runs you $7.80 for those. Now, for all the parts that are black, you'll need to dry brush those in Slanesh Gray, runs you $4.55. For all the parts that are going to be purple in these miniatures, you'll need to buy Nagaroth Knight, which runs you $4.55, and then you need to dry brush those with the color Lilac, which runs you also $4.55 for those as well. Next, for all the parts that are going to be khaki, you'll need to use Morghast Brown Bone, which runs you $4.55, and all the parts that are going to be in white, you need to use White Scar, which also runs you $4.55 as well. Now, for the palm leaf green color that we use for the laurels, as well as for the basing, as well as for the dry brushing of the bases, you need to use Militarium Green, which runs you $4.55. For the flesh, you need to buy a pot of Cadian Flesh Tone and then dry brush it with Flayed One's Flesh, which runs you $4.55 for those. Now, for the parts that are going to be done in the purple for the rider, for the lighter purple for the trousers, you need to buy Demonette Hide, and then of course for the leather goods you'll need to use Balor Brown, which runs you $4.55 for those, and of course you'll also need to use Barharoth Blue for all the parts that you picked on Tahitian Blue, which runs you $4.55 for those. And then for the stirrups you'll need to use 2 thin coats of Baneblade Brown, which runs you $4.55 for that color. Next, for the oil wash, you'll need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, which runs you $32 for that. Spray them down with Minotaurian Varnish, runs you $19.50 for that can. And then of course for the bases you'll need to paint the bases in Vulcan Green, which runs you $4.55, and of course the last color, which is Ulthuan Gray, will be used for the dry brushing of the stones that are on the bases as well, which runs you $4.55 as well. Now, assuming that you have to purchase everything on this list for the very first time to paint up this miniature unit, you'll need to have a grand total investment of $255.05 to buy everything on this list. That's right, $255.05. Now, for the Cheapskate method, the grand total runs you at $37.67 to paint up the Cheapskate method. So if you take the Citadel and Army Painters method of $255.05 and subtract the $37.67 we use for the Cheapskate method, we're talking about a grand total savings of $217.38, which is a hell of a lot of cash you could use on anything that you want besides paint. You know, use it on miniatures, use it on box sets, whatever. Or better yet, don't spend it all and just save it. It's entirely your choice. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you paint up a unit of Knightly Order Knights for the Empire Army, at the same time saving you $217 total on that one as well. As always, guys, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good to do it for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.